Satoshi of YouTubers, I am the Sceptical Leprechaun, and welcome to the channel where we get drunk on reason. In my last video, we discussed the flaws and fallacies contained within Thomas Aquinas' arguments from causation and contingency. We saw that these arguments fail to prove the existence of God because they rely on a number of irrational methods of argumentation. For example, it became clear that Aquinas commits the fallacy of composition. If you'd like to know more about Aquinas and his attempt to prove the existence of the divine, please consult my previous video. The goal of this video is to explore the cosmological argument as it is often presented by theists today. My reasoning here is twofold. Firstly, I want to avoid any criticism which may seek to suggest that I only deal with these arguments in their infantile forms. Secondly, and by extension, I want to engage with the best arguments that the theistic community has to offer. This is not to suggest that I believe that the arguments for God's existence in their current form are any stronger than the ones from antiquity. However, I think it's undeniable that many theists believe that modern apologists have developed and refined these arguments, thereby strengthening them and providing a much more robust and rational basis for theism. On a side note, I think it's important to point out here that while I will hold to my promise and honestly engage with modern iterations of these arguments, I don't actually believe that these arguments have changed much at all. I am skeptical of the claim that modern theists have come up with some new cutting-edge approach that renders the earlier arguments for God's existence useless. It seems to me that many, if not all of these so-called modern arguments for God's existence are simply reworded versions of those same old arguments that were conceived in the minds of thinkers such as Aristotle and Plato. In any case, with scholarly integrity in mind, and in the interest of exploring the philosophical and theistic landscape thoroughly, what follows is an exploration of one of the most popular renditions of the cosmological argument. I speak, of course, of the Kalam Cosmological argument. It might seem odd to some of you that I am only now exploring the Kalam Cosmological argument in this series. After all, the Kalam argument predates Aquinas' machinations on the subject. But allow me to explain. Remember, the goal here is to explore the cosmological argument as it is presented by theists today. So while the Kalam predates Aquinas chronologically speaking, it actually surpasses him in terms of relevancy in the 21st century. For this reason, I intentionally postponed my discussion on the Kalam cosmological argument for a later video, and here we are. The Kalam cosmological argument dates back to at least the 9th century, within the writings of al-Kindi, an Arab Muslim philosopher and mathematician. The argument was further refined in the 11th and 12th centuries by one of the most prominent and influential philosophers of Sunni Islam, namely al-Ghazali. As an aside, I think it's very important that despite the so-called Islamic origins of the Kalam cosmological argument, Christian theists readily deploy it today. And yes, I'm aware Christians, Jews and Muslims believe in the same God. Don't worry, the Sceptical Leprechaun has done his homework. But you are simply in denial if you do not recognize the mutual exclusivity of these faiths, in terms of how they suggest one should live their life and how one gets to paradise and so on. Suffice to say, there is a particular and somewhat humorous irony in the idea of a Christian theist using the ideas of al-Kindi and al-Ghazali in order to prove the existence of God. Although the Quran is arguably a plagiarism of the Bible and the Torah that came before it, so I guess it's only fair that Christians get to plagiarize Muslims for a change, right? I mean, what I meant to say was that the Quran is the best book ever written, ever. It's the perfect word of the creator of the universe. Perfect in every way. Please strike my previous comments from the records. And with that awkward backtrack out of the way, let's carry on. Backtracking, the cornerstone of modern political discourse. And that brings us to arguably the best known Christian apologist in the world today, namely William Lane Craig. Craig is believed by many to be the Rocky Balboa of Christian apologetics. But if that's the case, just consider me to be one of the latter Rocky sequels. You know those movies that took a seemingly promising career of a young and talented Sylvester Stallone and turned him into a B-movie straight-to-DVD Hollywood embarrassment? Well, that's what I'm going to do to Craig's Balboa-esque reputation. Who am I kidding? I love Sylvester Stallone. Mick!
Hey, wait, I think maybe we can do a little something, I thought, maybe you...
Suffice to say, and in keeping with the Rocky-themed discussion, I plan to deliver a proverbial KO to Craig's reputation. I know, I think I just got a little bit sick in my mouth when I said that too. Needless to say, Craig is not the progenitor of the Kalam Cosmological argument, but his writings and public appearances are undeniably responsible for its return to popularity. So, without further ado, let's take a look at Craig's rendition of the Kalam Cosmological argument, and who better to explain it than Craig himself.
Why does the universe exist instead of just nothing? Where did it come from? There must have been a cause which brought the universe into being. We can summarize the argument thus far as follows. Premise 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. 2, the universe began to exist. 3, therefore, the universe has a cause. Given the truth of the two premises, the conclusion necessarily follows.
So there you have it, the Kalam Cosmological argument in all its glory. But as you may have noticed, there's no mention of God. In fact, I could grant every premise of the argument right now, and all I would have conceded is that the universe has a cause. So surely Craig has more to say. How does he conclude that this cause is a God? And more specifically, how does he conclude that this cause is the Christian God? To explain, here's another excerpt from Craig.
Now, from the very nature of the case, this cause must be an uncaused, changeless, timeless, and immaterial being which created the universe. It must be uncaused because we've seen there cannot be an infinite regress of causes. It must be timeless and therefore changeless, at least without the universe, because it created time. Because it also created space, it must transcend space as well, and therefore be immaterial, not physical. Now, there are only two possible candidates that could fit such a description. Either an abstract object like a number, or else an unembodied mind or consciousness. But abstract objects don't stand in causal relations. The number 7, for example, can't cause anything. And therefore it follows logically that the transcendent cause of the universe is an unembodied mind. And thus we are brought not merely to a first uncaused cause of the universe, but to its personal creator.
That's it. There you have it, the Kalam Cosmological argument as presented by William Lane Craig. Convinced? You might be wondering at this point, what makes the Kalam Cosmological argument different from the arguments of Aristotle and Aquinas that were explored in my previous videos? The short answer is very little, but there is one subtle yet significant change. The Kalam argument uses the word begins. Premise 1 states that whatever begins to exist has a cause. This is in contrast to other cosmological arguments which merely claim that whatever exists has a cause. Some would argue that this refinement in phraseology within the Kalam solves a common objection, i.e., if everything in existence has a cause, then what caused God? To clarify this point, here's Craig once again.
This question, who created God, or all right, what is God's cause? I've heard so many college sophomores ask this question as though this is the sort of knockdown argument that destroys theism. And it's just based on a misunderstanding. Look at the first premise. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. That is to say, something cannot come into being out of nothing. Anything that begins to exist has a cause. But if something exists eternally, if it never comes into being, then it doesn't need a cause. And this is what the atheist has always said about the universe. This isn't special pleading for God. The atheist has typically said the universe is eternal and uncaused, and therefore there doesn't need to be anything beyond it. The problem is, philosophical argument and scientific evidence now make that improbable. So God, the answer is a timeless being beyond space and time, necessary in his existence, didn't have a beginning, and therefore is the first uncaused cause. So the question is really, what is the cause of the first uncaused cause? You know, which is sort of like asking about the name of the married bachelor's wife. You know, it just is meaningless.
Needless to say, by phrasing the argument as whatever begins to exist has a cause, the Kalam argument exempts God from its conclusion. A conclusion which indicates the antecedent nature of existent beings and objects. As a theist might put it, God didn't come into existence, he always existed. I think I agree with that first part, but not the second. Definitely not the second. In conclusion, I want to know your thoughts. Are you convinced by the Kalam Cosmological argument? Leaving aside God for a moment, are you even convinced that the universe requires a cause for its existence? If you were intrigued by any or all of these questions, make sure you check out my next video where I'm going to explore some of the flaws and fallacies contained within the Kalam Cosmological argument. Whatever your thoughts, I'd love to see them in the comments below. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of the video. If you liked it, leave a like. If you didn't, blame God. For anything else, please leave a comment below. I have been the Sceptical Leprechaun. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching. Slán go fóill.